Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Don Arleth, and you're watching World News Tonight here on TVP World. Tonight, we'll explore the Polish government's efforts to seek justice for what they say was a systemic abuse of authority under the Law and Justice government and hold former government officials accountable. Later, we'll be joined by the Polish Justice Minister, Adam Bodnar, so stay with us. But first up, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Roberta Metsola gets another term as President of the European Parliament. The EU Commission says it's going to send only low-level representatives to informal meetings under Hungary's presidency. And the Polish government continues its quest to hold members of the former government accountable for wrongdoing. We start off tonight at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, which kicked off its first plenary session today after the June elections. The MEPs voted first on a new 2.5-year term for Roberta Metsola, a center-right politician from Malta, as the president of the parliament. And some in the Polish delegation also had reasons to celebrate. Our Brussels correspondent Sasha Farbach is on location and has the latest. Good evening, Sasha. Now, was it much of a surprise that Metsola was chosen by MEPs today? How many votes did she get? And tell us a little bit about what happened with some of the other votes today.
Yeah, good evening, Don. Indeed, it was not much of a surprise. This is something that many knew would happen. I mean, she's well liked overall. Now, she got 562 votes out of 699 that were cast, with about 76 that were marked as blanks or not counted. So essentially, this is a done deal. This is not a surprise. Of course, a win for the EPP. She's well liked across the spectrum. Now, as you said, what other votes happened? 14 key vice president roles also voted on here today in several ballots. In fact, 2 of them. So in the first round, big win for the EPP. Those first 11 numbers. Second position there was the former Prime Minister of Poland, Ewa Kopacz, an MEP here, who got 572 votes. That's in second position, so a huge result for her, for the party. Now, after that special vote, I had a chance to speak with her at a press conference. Let's hear what she had to say about my question, what this means about Poland. Let's roll that now for you guys.
The EPP group in the European Parliament promotes its Polish representatives. Poland is the second largest delegation in the EPP, so it has the numbers. Just a reminder, we've gained 7 seats since the previous elections.
Right, so a big moment there for Poland, indeed, for the EPP. But we have to remind you, have the second biggest delegation, national delegation, to the European Parliament. And we're just getting in also fresh information, just as we close, that the ECR also got 2 vice presidents, snubbing the Patriots, who were in third for MEP numbers. That's the latest here from European Parliament. Back to you, Don.
All right, thank you very much for that, Sasha Farbach, reporting from Brussels. And on Thursday, MEPs will decide on whether Ursula von der Leyen gets her second term, so we'll be paying attention to that. Now, moving on, tens of billions of euros could be headed to Warsaw from the European Union in the very near future. This is good news for the Polish government, which has fought hard to unlock these funds, which were held up by a dispute between the bloc and the former government. EU finance ministers approved Poland's changes to the post-pandemic Reconstruction Fund today. Our reporter Kazimierz Wysiak has more.
The approval from EU finance ministers concerns changes proposed by the new Polish government to the Reconstruction Fund. This allows Warsaw to file for more payments, as these are tied to the so-called milestones, a set of conditions which need to be met in order to receive the funds.
The idea of a revision was to make these milestones more pragmatic and, first of all, achievable. It was about mobility, more ecological mobility, health system. Also, more money was placed to new investments in more digitalized farming.
Now that these conditions have been met, Poland can file for up to 60 billion euro, around 25 of it in subsidies and around 35 billion in preferential loans. A huge part of it will go to energy and climate, but also another huge chunk will go to digitalization.
The amount we spent of this one exact investment is almost the same as our annual budget of Ministry of Digital Affairs. So we can see this perspective, so we can see this opportunity that we have because of European funds. Without support from the European Union, it would not be possible. However, fortunately, we have this support and we will use every euro of that.
Until now, these funds were locked by the European Commission since 2021 because of the changes made by the previous, more conservative government of the Law and Justice Party to the judiciary in Poland. Now the new Polish government, a center-liberal coalition, is bringing back Poland to its course of better relations with the European Union. Hence, these funds are being unlocked step by step. From Warsaw, TVP World, Kazimierz Łysiak.
Just 2 weeks in, and Hungary's presidency of the Council of the EU has already sown discord amongst members of the bloc. In another bid to snub Vladimir Putin's biggest European ally, Viktor Orban, officials from the European Commission said they will not attend informal meetings. Instead, they'll send junior-level representatives.
Following EU foreign ministers boycotting the summit in Budapest, EU commissioners decided to follow suit, giving Hungarian PM Viktor Orban the cold shoulder.
In light of recent developments marking the start of the Hungarian presidency, the president has decided that the EU Commission will be represented at senior civil servant level only during informal meetings of the Council. The college visit to the presidency will not take place.
The College is the European Commission's leadership body comprising of 27 commissioners. The decision not to pay a visit to the Hungarian presidency is a major political blow against Orban. The wave of protests and boycotts came after the Hungarian Prime Minister made official trips to both Moscow and Beijing, a decision that was not sanctioned by the EU or NATO. In his words, the move was the first step in restoring dialogue between Brussels and Moscow. However, other EU leaders argue that Orban doesn't represent them.
As you know, the EU presidency no longer has power over foreign affairs after the Lisbon Treaty. Here, we got an impression that the presidency was mediating the war in Ukraine. We know that EU members are represented by the President of the EU Council and foreign policy by the High Representative.
Viktor Orban's close association with Moscow and former US President Donald Trump, who's running in this year's US presidential elections, has also put the prospects of military aid to Ukraine into question. During the first ECOFIN press conference held by the Hungarian presidency, the country's Minister of Finance had this to say about Ukraine.
We will closely follow the developments of the war in Ukraine and advance the necessary steps in the Council. So we work together in this project.
While the fate of the EU's support for Ukraine might seem uncertain, the EU Commission's position remains steadfast. However, analysts say discord among European officials is likely to grow in the coming months.
The Polish government is ramping up efforts to bring officials allegedly involved in abuses of power to justice. Polish prosecutors have relaunched 10 cases that were closed under the previous administration. Among them are cases against 3 members of the European Parliament from the now opposition party, Law and Justice.
Who will be the next in the government's crackdown on former officials? Subsequent members of the Polish opposition could face prosecutor charges for alleged abuses of power.
The ruling coalition, which represents most Poles, has taken the responsibility to bring its predecessors to justice for the wrongdoings, the injustice, also related to the Justice Fund. To put it simply, for all the fraud that happened during the 8 years in power of law and justice.
The cases against opposition MEPs Kosma Złotowski and Ryszard Czarnecki were reopened today. The 2 politicians were in the past suspected of extorting funds from the European Parliament, and then the prosecution declined to initiate proceedings.
Firstly, 2 years ago, I settled with the European Parliament, which has no claims against me. Secondly, I will not obstruct the proceedings. I respect the law.
Another case has been reopened against the Law and Justice MEP Daniel Obajtek, former CEO of Polish state oil giant Orlen. Obajtek had allegedly thwarted state inspectors from conducting an audit at the company. Efforts by Poland's government to investigate a slew of alleged abuses by the previous right-wing administration have accelerated with Monday's detention of former Deputy Minister of Justice. Marcin Romanowski is at the center of a probe into an alleged multi-million euro slush fund. Public money was allegedly used to finance political campaign events.
Marcina Romanowskiego.
The prosecutor filed a motion to court today for the 3-month temporary detention of suspect Marcin Romanowski. Yesterday, he was detained, and in the late evening hours, he was presented with 11 charges, including taking part in an organised crime ring.
Przestępczej przez okres ponad 5 lat.
Now the question is how far the probes will go. Will the big guns of the previous administration face charges? And could Jarosław Kaczyński, the leader of the right-wing Law and Justice Party, be brought before a court?
Being aware of illegal activities, especially for a public figure, for a politician, means that there is an obligation on his side to inform the public prosecution and also to inform the public authorities about this illegal activity. And Mr. Kaczyński failed to do that.
Two opposition MPs have so far been stripped of their immunity in connection to the alleged abuse of power at the Ministry of Justice. The immunity of the 3 MEPs from Law and Justice will, however, lie in the hands of the European Parliament if the Polish prosecution wants to press charges against them. Marek Steele, TVP World.
And now across the Atlantic, Donald Trump's choice of Senator J.D. Vance as his running mate is a telling sign of what's to come in a potential Trump administration. If the duo are elected come November, this could drive a wedge between the United States and the European Union over the current approach to Ukraine. Vance has said that he wants a negotiated settlement to end the war launched by Russia and opposes sending American funds and equipment to support Kyiv.
A bandaged Donald Trump makes a triumphant entrance at the Republican convention just days after the failed assassination attempt. By his side, J.D. Vance, his vice presidential pick. If Trump returns to the White House in November, his choice of Vance could have a profound impact on America's Ukraine policy. The 39-year-old senator from Ohio is fiercely opposed to using US funds to support Kyiv. Speaking in February, Vance said he wanted the US to change tack and seek an immediate end to the war.
I think that we have to wake up to the reality, and the reality is this is going to end in a negotiated settlement of some type. I think American policy and American diplomacy should be trying to bring that about as quickly as possible, not pretending that we can kick the can down the road and bring this thing to a different strategic settlement that exists today.
This resonates with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's message to EU leaders after a whirlwind tour of Moscow, Kyiv and the US. He says Trump is poised to act a peacemaker if he comes to power. Commentators say Vance's approach to Ukraine is at odds with the current EU-US position.
The way he voted kind of put us into the path of thinking that he actually might not support the Ukrainian cause in the way that we see it in Poland.
The EU has been trying to smooth relations between Brussels and Washington. If Trump takes the White House, those transatlantic ties may undergo a significant shake-up.
Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban told EU leaders that Donald Trump has, quote-unquote, well-founded plans to end the war in Ukraine in a private letter leaked to the Financial Times today. Our Ukraine correspondent joins us live from Kyiv with more. Good evening, Oz.
Good evening.
Now, has there been any official reaction from Kyiv regarding Orban's outreach to former President Trump or yesterday's announcement of J.D. Vance as Trump's running mate, as there are obvious implications with that?
So nothing in the way of official reactions. We did hear in a press conference yesterday Zelensky saying that he was unaware of Orban's trip to Moscow following his surprise visit to Kyiv. And he said that it would be wrong for Orban to use his trip to Kyiv in order to advance his plans. Now, we do know from this letter that the Financial Times has published, talking about Donald Trump's proposed peace plans, not only that Orban is angling for the EU to resume diplomatic relations with Russia, which is a complete non-starter between Brussels and Moscow, effectively. And also the J.D. Vance appointment does indicate that the Trump administration really is heading towards this policy of cutting Ukraine off. That appears to be what Orban is saying in this letter. That appears to be the messaging that Trump has been giving for many months now. Also, an interesting part of the letter, Orban talks about the fact that either they need to restart negotiations with Moscow, the EU, or they need to start thinking about having to fund the war themselves. And I think this is a much more important point than any kind of peace plan, which, Zelensky's people have already rebuffed this time and time again. There is no peace proposal on the table, but the EU needs to start taking seriously a Trump presidency might happen, and they need to start thinking about how they could deal with the Ukraine war on their doorstep without American funds.
Oz Chatterjee reporting to us live from Kyiv. Thank you very much and stay safe. Now for an unbearable situation in Transylvania. After a spate of attacks on humans, Romania is more than doubling the number that it illegally culls to nearly 500. The move comes less than a week after a 19-year-old hiker was mauled to death by a bear on a popular trail in the Carpathian Mountains.
Thousands of pilgrims make their way to a monastery in Romania's Carpathian Mountains. Their biggest fear, being attacked by a bear. That's exactly what happened to one woman on a trail last week. The 19-year-old was chased, then killed by a bear that was later shot dead. The tragedy prompted action from the authorities, who are increasingly hearing reports of sightings. Politicians have agreed to more than double the annual bear cull, from 220 to 481. Opposition MPs said the government should have acted earlier.
Let's come up with better laws in the next session, so that we will no longer be the only country in Europe where people can be eaten by a bear.
Romania has Europe's largest brown bear population outside Russia, numbering around 8,000 animals. They've killed 26 people and severely injured 274 others over the past 2 decades. MPs are hoping the move keeps residents and tourists in mountain towns safe from the wild animals.
And now joining us to discuss the pursuit of justice for wrongdoing under the former government is Polish Justice Minister Adam Bodnar. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us tonight on TVP World.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yes, now we've seen quite a number of high-profile charges and arrests of opposition politicians from the previous administration on charges of abuses of power, misuse of public funds. But so far, only relatively minor figures have been tied up and been charged. Will you take action against some of the higher-ups in the Law and Justice Party, as they must have known about these abuses taking place under their watch?
I think it is a good question, but first of all, it is not my decision to present charges or to basically decide on who is going to be charged with different crimes. And second, I would not agree that these are just minor figures. Mr. Romanowski, who has been subject of this procedure to lift his immunity, and as I understand today, there is a court hearing concerning his potential pretrial detention. He's a former Deputy Minister of Justice. So I think that it is quite a high figure in terms of administration with money, with the Justice Fund. And we'll see how things would go and to what extent all those cases that are subject of proceedings right now may produce some further accusations against people who have been supervising the work of ministers.
Many are wondering about, of course, Law and Justice Chairman Mr. Jarosław Kaczynski. Could he potentially be involved in any charges down the road? Is there anything that the ministry is looking at currently?
We are not working like this, that we are looking at one or the other case in order to kind of find some arguments. Simply, my mission is to bring accountability. I think that in this transitional moment, when we are getting out of 8 years of illiberal regime in Poland, it is important to present and to bring justice to those people who are simply misusing the system for the political purpose or for simply financial gain. And in the case of the Justice Fund, it is the special investigative team that is dealing with this case. And simply, we have this notion in Polish language that the investigation is subject of further development. So it means that maybe at a certain point, for example, Minister Ziobro could be subject of some proceedings because he's the one who knew about the case and he didn't react because he didn't have, he was, to a great extent, his party was taking advantage of this Justice Fund, and this Justice Fund was used to a great extent as a kind of a purse for the political purposes of this party.
Yeah, some type of slush fund. Now, Mr. Kaczynski and other opposition politicians have accused you, sir, of pursuing a political agenda, a political campaign, using the justice system to target members of the Law and Justice government, who are now made up of the opposition. What is your response to such accusations?
Just look at the Justice Fund. The case is known, that the abuse with the Justice Fund is known more or less from 2019, okay? In 2019, there were first really comprehensive reports by journalists about different abuses of money from this fund. Moreover, next year, in 2020, there was a comprehensive report of the Supreme Audit Chamber. Moreover, the government of Mateusz Morawiecki has been informed about those abuses. Even we have a letter that Morawiecki government is asking Minister of Justice Zbigniew Ziobro, what are you doing here with this, and what is your reaction to the Supreme Audit Chamber report? And there was no reaction whatsoever. So what I do is simply bringing justice to a situation that has been not subject of accountability until 2023, because there was no political willingness to do anything regarding this. So please look that prosecution service has been used for all those years as a kind of a political instrument, as a political mechanism. And right now we have to come back to some old cases, but also we have to pursue, we have to move forward with some cases concerning different abuses, whether these are Pegasus spyware abuse, different abuses committed in state-owned companies, or this Justice Fund case.
Now, do you feel that the alleged abuse of the Justice Fund was carried out by rogue individuals operating by themselves without oversight, or do you think that potentially more people were aware of this at higher levels?
Please look that this case is quite special because Minister Romanowski is not having just a charge of abuse of power, but it is also a charge of organized criminal group, which is quite rare and quite non-typical for the previous minister, deputy minister, to accuse him of that kind of things. So in the Polish criminal law, accusing somebody of being the part of the organized criminal group is something significant. But it means that you have a bigger number of people here. Right. So not only him, not only Mr. Romanowski, but also some other people that were taking advantage of this money, usually beneficiaries of the Justice Fund. So all those different NGOs and other organizations that were getting money from the fund in unclear and non-transparent way. And we will see how it goes further, to what extent the case may develop. Right now we have 12 persons with charges. There are 3 persons in pretrial detention right now. There is another motion for this detention for Mr. Romanowski, but it is like a bigger thing. And moreover, I think in this case that it is not just about abuse for the money purpose, but about rather creating some kind of a network of organizations that are taking advantage of the operation of the Justice Fund, and in exchange they are providing some, let's say, political support to the Ministry of Justice, to the sovereign Poland, the party that was leading the Ministry of Justice at that time.
So some type of conspiracy almost. When it comes to the alleged abuses of the Justice Fund and the Pegasus scandal, who do you think that the final responsibility lies with concerning that? How far up the government chain of command in law and justice do you think that goes?
I see that you are coming back to the same question. I don't know. We'll see. I think, my role is to provide prosecutors with independence and with freedom to act in those cases. And we'll see what will be the consequence of their actions. I see that they are very determined to clear those cases out and to move forward. And I see there is a lot of public expectation that we do this process of transition properly. Please note that quite often people come back to some cases from the past. There was one case when Minister Ziobro was going to stand before the Tribunal of State, the court which is responsible for the constitutional abuse, and people do remember that there was lack of political willingness some time ago to move forward with this case. I think right now the feeling is such that you cannot just create some kind of a thick line and to say that nothing happened. Quite otherwise, if you are misusing the power, if you are taking advantage of the public money, you should be held accountable for this. And basically that is the way how the prosecution service is working these days. And at the same time, prosecution is, in my opinion, kind of rebuilding itself into the structure which is accountable to simply public opinion, that they are, with every statement, with every position, they do everything what they can in order to explain their position and their legal actions taken.
There's a risk that by pushing for lifting of the immunity of MPs, you're setting a dangerous precedent, which new governments can pursue members of the previous government. We've seen this, we've sort of seen this unfolding in the United States, but if we look at Poland, what's to say that the next government that comes into power, that's not the current makeup, the current ruling coalition, what's to say that this will not repeat itself and we're going to have a constant cycle of judicial witch hunting to prosecute politicians?
I think the answer is as clear as possible. We should be honest, we should be integral, and we should basically not think in any moment of our services to the government about taking any financial or private gain out of the function we perform. So in my opinion, it is the future, and that is what I believe really strongly of this government, to be highly integral and in what we are doing. And my feeling is that if there are no arguments later on, then there will be no risk of abusing that kind of a procedure. In this situation, please note that those cases are really very carefully prepared by the prosecution service. Even I remember there was a pressure, to be honest, some time ago on me, you should speed up with things, you should, go forward. And I said, come on, listen, guys. It is serious work. Prosecutors should have time to prepare all those motions to lift parliamentary immunity. But if those motions are submitted, then they are bulletproof regarding their quality. And I hope that basically they will face verification later on by Polish courts, and they will result with proper cases. So simply. We have really observed a lot of different abuses over those years, and there is no other way to move forward. You should simply go forward with different accountability procedures here.
One final question. Now, you've mentioned that the lines, the lack of political will to prosecute things that prosecutors should be looking at. What are the next steps when it comes to restoring the independence of the judiciary? How important is next year's presidential elections in this context? And what happens if the elections don't seem to pan out for the ruling coalition?
First of all, there are a number of plans. I have presented action plan to the Council of European Union regarding the rule of law recovery. And there are a few laws that are either already prepared or are subject of preparation. Even today, we've just announced the draft law on the separation of the office of the Minister of Justice and the Prosecutor General. So it is not a natural situation that I'm in those both functions. We had this separation between 2010 and 2016. Then Mr. Ziobro merged those functions, but we want to come back to the previous solution. But there are also different laws concerning the National Council of Judiciary, vetting of judges, draft law on the Supreme Court. We would like to move forward with presenting and adopting those laws by the end of 2024. And then you are right that we have presidential elections, and it seems that with the current president, there is no much chance of being, let's say, in this collaborative mood regarding judiciary. So maybe those laws would have to wait for the new president to come. And so I assume that the new president will be the one who simply supports the reform of the judiciary and the full rule of law recovery.
Okay, well, Justice Minister Adam Bodnar, thank you very much for joining us on TVP World. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time.